The sting of Travis's slap still burned on my cheek, his demand for my house keys ringing in my ears. Still, I didn't move, my fingers gripping the armrest, the weight of betrayal heavier than the pain. As his footsteps echoed through the house, the smell of his cologne mixed with the dust of old memories. While the quiet hum of the house surrounded me, I realized this wasn't just about the house. It was about my own son-in-law trying to tear apart my family. That's when I knew I'd take back control and make him regret it. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The small house smelled of garlic and simmering tomato sauce, the kind of warm, familiar scent that made Charlie feel like he was back in his own kitchen decades ago. Sunday dinner, the tradition that had somehow survived even the chaos of modern life. He stood at the front door of Lily's home, a quiet ache in his chest as he adjusted the bag of handmade wooden toys tucked under his arm. They were for the kids, Harper and Jonah, who always seemed to light up when Grandpa visited. As he stepped inside, the din of family life hit him. Harper was chasing Jonah around the living room, laughing, while Lily moved between the kitchen and the table, trying to set things in order. The familiar sounds of family, chaos mixed with love. But there was something in the air tonight. A tension, barely noticeable, but undeniable. Travis, already seated at the table, looked up from his phone and shot Charlie a thin smile. His posture was rigid, like he was trying to hold himself up with pride, or maybe it was something else. Charlie couldn't quite place it, but he didn't have to. Travis always had a way of hiding behind words, deflecting any deeper connection with a facade of arrogance. "Good to see you, Charlie," Travis said, though his voice had an edge to it, like a compliment with strings attached. Charlie nodded, offering a quiet, "Thanks for having me," as he set the toys down on the kitchen counter. He was careful not to draw attention to them, nothing to get Travis riled up about, not tonight. Lily flashed him a tired smile as she set a plate of pasta down in front of him. "Sorry it's a little late tonight, Dad. Things have been hectic," she said, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Charlie saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the world balancing on her shoulders as she tried to keep everything together. Travis, still scrolling through his phone, snorted lightly. "Yeah, well, you know what they say. No one ever has time for anything these days, especially not for retirement." He dragged the word out slowly, like it was something to be judged, something that didn't fit in with his world. Lily winced, clearly uncomfortable. "Travis, please, it's just dinner." Charlie's hand tightened on his fork. He didn't bite, not yet, but it didn't take long for Travis to dig a little deeper. "So, Charlie," Travis began, turning his chair slightly to face him, "how's that big house of yours holding up? Must be tough, huh? Too big for one old man, don't you think?" His voice dripped with feigned concern, but Charlie could see the underlying calculation in his eyes. The words stung, though Charlie knew better than to show it. He'd heard this before. Travis had a habit of casually commenting on his house, as if it were an inconvenience or an asset he could somehow claim. But Charlie, despite the knot in his stomach, refused to let it show. "I'm managing just fine, Travis," Charlie replied evenly, his gaze steady. "The house suits me." Travis smirked, not backing off. Right, but it's just one person. A house like that, well, it doesn't make sense, does it? For you, I mean. I've been telling Lily, something needs to change. A guy like you shouldn't be sitting on all that space. You could sell it. Get something smaller, something easier to manage." Lily's face tightened, her lips pressing together in a way that said she didn't want to argue. She looked down at her plate, stirring the pasta without really seeing it. Charlie felt her struggle, the way she was caught between the man she loved and the father who had always been her rock. He wanted to reach out, to make everything easier for her, but tonight was not the time. "Maybe I'll think about it," Charlie said, his tone neutral but firm. He knew what Travis was doing, trying to push his way into decisions that didn't concern him. Charlie wasn't going to let him do that. Not now, not ever. Travis leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "Yeah, well, there's always options, right? I've got some ideas. Maybe you'll want to hear them someday." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with implications. Charlie sensed the quiet pressure building, but he kept his voice calm. I'm not in any rush. I'll decide when the time comes. The room fell into a brief silence, the air thick with unspoken tension. Harper's giggle broke the moment, distracting them all for a second. But Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that Travis was testing the waters, waiting for a crack in the foundation. He couldn't be sure yet, but he knew he had to keep his guard up. As dinner wrapped up and the kids made their way toward the living room, Charlie watched Lily give him a quick, almost imperceptible squeeze of his hand, a silent apology. She knew. She knew what Travis was doing, but she couldn't stop it, not yet. Charlie gave her a faint smile, his heart heavy with the weight of it all. He wasn't going to let this go, but the path forward wasn't clear. Not yet. When Travis finally left the room to answer a phone call, Charlie looked at Lily. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet pleading. She was stuck. And he had no idea just how deep Travis's web of manipulation had grown. The only thing he knew for sure was that things were about to change, and Travis was not going to get away with this. The night air was colder than usual, a sharp bite of early winter settling over Richmond as Charlie stepped outside to the porch. He needed a moment to breathe, to gather his thoughts after the tense dinner. The weight of Travis's words still hung in the air, lingering like smoke. The subtle jabs, the constant pressure to part with his home, it was all becoming too much. As he leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on the darkened street, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting Lily, maybe a soft apology, but instead, there was Travis, his face twisted in frustration. You don't get it, do you? Travis's voice was low, but edged with a quiet anger, the kind that always hinted at something darker. Charlie stood up straighter, but he didn't move, didn't speak. He knew this was coming, had felt it all night. Travis stepped closer, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket. I'm not asking, Charlie, I'm telling you. Give me your house keys. Lily deserves better than this, better than what you're giving her. His voice cracked with a mix of rage and something else, something desperate. Charlie's heart tightened, his chest a little heavier with each word Travis spat. He'd been through this before, manipulation, threats cloaked as concern. But this time, it felt different. There was an aggression behind Travis's eyes that made Charlie's gut twist. I'm not giving you my house keys, Travis, Charlie said, his voice steady. He wasn't angry, wasn't raising his voice. He was just calm. But the anger inside him was there, bubbling beneath the surface. The fact that Travis was making this demand, that he had the nerve, made his blood run cold. Travis's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. There was a flicker of something in his expression, something primal, like he couldn't control the rage that was starting to build. The silence between them thickened, the kind of silence that told Charlie something was coming, something he couldn't predict, but knew was inevitable. Then, without warning, Travis stepped forward and slapped him. The sound of the blow echoed in the still night air, sharp and unforgiving. Charlie's head snapped to the side, his cheek burning with the sting of the slap. His breath hitched, but he didn't flinch, didn't react. He stood there, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched. He could feel the blood rushing to his face, the humiliation stinging like fire, but he didn't show it. Not now. Travis stood there, his breath coming heavy, chest heaving with the aftermath of his outburst. His face was twisted in a mix of anger and something darker, something desperate. That house will be mine anyway, Travis said, his voice colder now, more calculating. You can't keep it forever. Lily's gonna need something better, something real. Charlie's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm, his gaze fixed on Travis, unwavering. You don't know anything about what Lily needs, he said, the words quiet but heavy with conviction. Travis let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You think you can protect her? You think that house, that thing, is going to keep her safe? I'll take it from you. Old man, you don't have a choice. The rage that had flared inside Charlie was smothered by something colder, something far more dangerous. Resolve. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to make a scene. His silence, his calm, was enough. Charlie turned slowly, walking toward the door. His movements were deliberate, controlled, though his chest tightened with the anger he refused to let surface. The slap, the threat, it had shaken him, yes. But he was already thinking ahead, already planning. He had no intention of letting Travis win. As he reached for the door, he glanced back once more. Travis was standing there, still breathing heavily, his eyes flashing with that same arrogance. Charlie didn't speak another word. He didn't need to. The message had been sent. The game had changed, and Travis had just made his first mistake. Charlie stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him with finality. His mind raced, but his face remained an impassive mask. He couldn't let Travis get under his skin. Not now. Lily, sitting at the kitchen table, looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with concern. But Charlie said nothing. He didn't need to. He wouldn't burden her with what had just happened. Not yet. He could feel her watching him, waiting for him to speak, but he didn't. He walked past her, his mind already turning over his next steps. The silence between them hung thick. Lily opened her mouth to speak, but Charlie shook his head. "It's fine," he said, his voice low but steady. "We're fine." But deep inside, he knew they weren't. Not anymore. The stakes had been raised, and he wasn't about to let Travis win. Not now. Not ever. The night was far from over. The sound of the phone ringing was enough to pull Charlie from his restless sleep. He had barely slept, the slap still burning on his cheek, the weight of Travis's threats circling his thoughts like vultures. He reached for the phone, his fingers brushing against the screen, the name on the display flashing in stark letters. Lily. He took a deep breath before answering, his heart tightening in anticipation of what she might say. The phone crackled as her voice came through, thick with emotion. "Dad," she choked out, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's gotten into him. I didn't know he would. He's never..." Her voice broke, the rawness of her regret stabbing at Charlie's chest. Charlie closed his eyes, his stomach clenching. The last thing he wanted to do was add to her guilt. He could hear the sound of her crying on the other end of the line, the shame in her voice pulling at him. She had no idea what had happened, not really. He'd kept the details to himself. He couldn't burden her with that. Not now. "Lily," he said, his voice soft but firm. "It's all right. You don't need to apologize." He paused, letting the silence hang between them for a moment. "I know you're doing your best. I'm not angry at you. We'll figure this out." "But..." She tried to interrupt, but Charlie cut her off gently. "No, Lily," he said, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I'm not going to hold this against you. This isn't on you." He could feel the weight of the truth pressing on him as he spoke those words, as if saying them out loud somehow made them real. But it wasn't on her. Not completely. Travis was the one who had crossed a line, not Lily. She sniffled, and he could hear the relief in her exhale. But the conversation didn't end there. She was still in the thick of it, still caught in the web of Travis's control. And Charlie knew that. He could feel it in every shaky breath she took. "I'll be okay," Charlie added, though his mind was racing, already calculating his next move. "Don't worry about me. Just take care of yourself." Lily didn't say much more, just a soft thank you before the line went quiet. He hung up and sat there in the dim morning light, feeling the weight of the situation settle deeper into his bones. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. As Charlie went about his morning routine, making a pot of coffee and trying to shake off the heavy silence that had settled in the house, a knock at the door broke his reverie. He opened the door to find Marla Jennings standing there, her concerned eyes scanning him as she stepped inside. Marla was the neighbor who had become something of a quiet confidant over the years, always there when he needed someone to talk to, always watching with that perceptive gaze of hers. "You all right, Charlie?" she asked softly, her voice full of that neighborly concern that only came from years of living side by side. She stepped closer, then her eyes flicked to his face, noticing the bruise on his cheek. It was faint, still raw, the outline of Travis's hand lingering beneath his skin. Charlie didn't immediately respond. Instead, he turned slightly, avoiding her gaze for a moment. He could feel the weight of her stare, the judgment behind it, but he didn't care. "Marla," he said quietly, It's not what you think. I didn't want you to see this." His hand brushed across his cheek as if trying to erase the mark, but he knew it wouldn't go away so easily. Marla's face softened, the concern deepening. "Charlie," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "What happened?" Charlie exhaled, his shoulders dropping in defeat. He wasn't going to lie to her, not to Marla. She deserved better than that. "Travis. He lost control last night. It wasn't about dinner or the house. He got angry, and he slapped me. But I'm fine. It's nothing I can't handle." Marla's eyes narrowed with a mixture of disbelief and anger, her lips pressed tight. "That boy's got a temper, doesn't he?" Charlie didn't answer right away. What could he say? He had already known it. It had always been there, bubbling under the surface. But now, it was out in the open. Now, there were no more excuses. "He's been asking around the neighborhood," Marla said after a moment, her tone taking on a sharper edge. "He's been telling people he's interested in consolidating properties." She said it with a small, disapproving shake of her head. "I don't like it, Charlie, not one bit." Charlie's blood ran cold. He'd suspected as much. The threat had been subtle, but it was clear now. Travis was plotting. He wasn't just angry. He was strategizing, building the pieces of a plan he thought would come together in his favor. "I'll handle it," Charlie replied, his voice low, a quiet determination rising in him. He wasn't going to let this happen. Not to Lily, not to the kids, not to him. As Marla left, offering one last word of caution, Charlie's phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Lily. "Please don't do anything yet," it read. Charlie stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what that meant. She was still trying to protect Travis. She didn't want him to escalate things. But Charlie could already feel the storm on the horizon. He wasn't going to back down, not this time. And as he scrolled through his notifications, a chill ran down his spine when he saw it. Travis had posted photos of his house online, as if it were up for sale, as if it were no longer his. Charlie clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. The game was on. But who would win? The lines had been drawn, and there was no turning back. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the half-drawn blinds, casting muted shadows across the living room. Charlie sat at the old wooden desk, the familiar hum of the computer in front of him barely audible. He had woken up early, as he always did, but today there was something different. An unease, a simmering feeling of urgency that hadn't been there before. He couldn't shake the memory of last night, of the slap, of the threat. Travis's words kept echoing in his mind, each repetition sharper than the last. "That house will be mine anyway." Charlie had to be sure, had to see it for himself. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard as he pulled up the local real estate listings. The words Richmond, VA flashed on the screen as he typed in his own address, not sure of what he was looking for, but knowing that something had changed. The first listing he clicked on made his stomach drop. It was a house he knew well. Too well. It was his. The description under the photos, a clean, professional write-up, stated in plain language, owner willing to transfer quickly. Charlie's blood ran cold. The house was his, had always been his. How the hell had it ended up here, listed like a simple property for sale? The description itself was smooth, clinical, no mention of the name or any identification of the rightful owner. It was just another cold listing in a sea of homes, as if someone were trying to pass it off like any other deal. Willing to transfer quickly. The words burned into his mind, flashing like a warning sign. No authorization, no mention of any paperwork or legitimacy, just the empty promise of a transaction. It was fraud, plain and simple. Charlie's hand shook slightly as he took screenshots of the listing, each image capturing the proof he needed. His thoughts raced. Travis had crossed the line. But how deep was this betrayal? How far had his son-in-law gone to try and take control of what was rightfully his? His mind churned with 100 possibilities. The only thing that was certain now was that Travis was playing a dangerous game, and Charlie was going to make sure he lost. But for now, Charlie knew he had to be careful. This wasn't something that could be handled with a rash move. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He stood up, closing the laptop, his heart still pounding. When he opened the door, Marla was standing there, her face tight with concern. "I heard some things, Charlie," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Things you might want to know." Charlie didn't have to ask. He had already suspected as much. "What did you hear?" he asked, his voice low. Marla leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "I overheard Travis talking to a couple of guys down at the diner. He was bragging about future property expansion, about consolidating assets, and how he was going to make things work for his family." Her eyes flickered nervously. "I don't think it was just about your house, Charlie. He's planning something bigger. He wants more than just that house." Charlie felt his pulse quicken as the pieces started to click into place. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. Travis wasn't just trying to force him out of his home. No, this was a calculated move, a power grab, and Charlie was in the middle of it, whether he liked it or not. "Thanks, Marla," Charlie said, his voice steady but filled with the kind of quiet rage that had been simmering just below the surface since the night before. "I appreciate you looking out." Marla gave him a long, searching look. "You be careful, Charlie. That boy's dangerous, and he's got a way of making people believe what he wants them to." Charlie nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't wrong. Travis had always had a way with people, a way of getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. And right now, that cost was about to get a lot higher. When Marla left, Charlie sat down again, his mind swirling. He couldn't make a move just yet, not with Lily still in the dark, not with everything hanging in the balance. He needed to know more. He needed someone who could help him navigate this. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen as he scrolled through his contacts. Kim Dawson's name popped up, the attorney who had helped him with a few minor issues in the past. Kim was sharp, strategic, and always had a way of thinking 10 steps ahead. He dialed her number, pressing the phone to his ear, his mind already racing through what he'd say. She picked up after the second ring. "Kim," he started, his voice steady but edged with tension. "I need your help. There's something going on with Travis, and I need to know what my options are. I'm dealing with fraud, and it's going too far." Kim's voice was calm but firm. "Tell me everything." Charlie took a deep breath, glancing at the screenshot he had just taken. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just about a slap. It was about taking back what was his. And he wasn't going to let Travis have it, no matter the cost. As he spoke with Kim, the weight of the situation pressed down on him, but there was also a spark of something else. Determination. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The real battle had only just begun. The office felt cold, almost clinical. Charlie sat across from Kim Dawson, his hands clasped together in his lap. He had been in her office many times before, but today it felt different. The air was heavier, filled with the tension of a problem that had only just begun to reveal itself. His gaze was fixed on the screen in front of him, his fingers tapping restlessly against his leg as Kim scrolled through the screenshots of the real estate listing. Kim was quiet, her eyes scanning the photos with a careful precision. She had always been sharp, quick to assess, quick to understand, but Charlie could see the concern flickering across her face as she studied the fraudulent listing. "This isn't just a misunderstanding," Kim said finally, leaning back in her chair. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight. "This is clear fraud, no authorization, a property listed for sale with no legal right to do so." She paused, her eyes meeting Charlie's. "This is bigger than you think, Charlie." He exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. He had expected this, had known deep down that things weren't as simple as they seemed, but hearing it out loud made it real. Travis hadn't just pushed boundaries. He had crossed a line, one that couldn't be ignored. Charlie's throat tightened. He had come here for answers, but now that they were beginning to form, they were harder to face than he'd anticipated. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice low, carrying the weight of a question he wasn't sure he wanted the answer to. He wasn't sure he could handle much more of this. The slap, the threat, the blatant disregard for his rights. It was all piling up on him, and he felt like he was suffocating under the pressure. Kim paused, her fingers tapping thoughtfully on her desk, as she weighed her next words carefully. "First, we don't confront him yet. Let him dig deeper," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Right now, you're the one in control. He's overplaying his hand, and if we react too quickly, he might force your hand into something more drastic." Charlie nodded, though a part of him was itching to do something, anything to make Travis back off. The thought of waiting, of giving Travis more time to escalate things, didn't sit well with him. But he trusted Kim. He had to. He knew she wouldn't steer him wrong. "I don't know how much more I can take," Charlie muttered, his eyes flicking to the computer screen where the fraudulent listing was still open. He felt a bitter anger boiling up inside of him. Anger at Travis, at himself for not seeing it sooner, at the situation that was spiraling out of his control. Kim leaned forward, her expression softening just a little. "I know it's hard," she said, her tone a little gentler now. "But this isn't just about a house, Charlie. It's about what he's trying to do. This is coercion, not just assault. He's using pressure tactics, trying to manipulate you into giving up your property. And that's not just illegal, it's dangerous." The word dangerous hit Charlie harder than he expected. He had been thinking of this as a simple fight over a house, a disagreement that could be settled with the right lawyer, the right evidence. But Kim's words made it clear. This was about more than just a property. It was about control, about power, about something far deeper than he had imagined. "He slapped me," Charlie said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words tasted bitter, like something he couldn't quite swallow. He hadn't wanted to say it. He hadn't wanted to admit that it had come to that Travis had crossed that line. But Kim needed to hear it. Kim's eyes softened, but there was a sharpness to her gaze now. "I know. You've mentioned it before. But this isn't just a case of physical assault. This is a pattern of manipulation, of coercion. And when you tie that to property fraud, it's a serious issue." Charlie's fists clenched at his sides, the memory of Travis's slap still fresh in his mind. The anger that had been brewing inside him since the moment it happened surged again. He wanted to act on it, wanted to march right over to Travis and make him pay for what he'd done. But Charlie knew better. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about strategy. And right now, waiting was the hardest part. Kim continued, her voice calm but steady. "We'll pull property records. We'll reinforce boundaries. We'll make sure he knows you're not someone he can push around. But we do it carefully, and we do it right." She leaned back, her eyes never leaving his. "It's time to build a case, a solid one." Charlie nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "Okay," he said, the word leaving his mouth heavier than he intended. "I'll let you handle it, but I need to know that we're doing everything we can." Kim smiled faintly, a hint of reassurance in her expression. "We will, Charlie. I've got your back. This won't be over until we make sure Travis loses." Charlie exhaled sharply, feeling a slight sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a plan, something concrete to hold on to. But as he stood up, ready to leave the office and face the reality of what was ahead, a part of him knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. There was more to uncover, more to fight for, and Travis hadn't seen the worst of it yet. As Charlie walked out of the office, the tension in his chest remained. This battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The knock at the door was sharp, unexpected. Charlie hadn't been expecting anyone, especially not Travis. He'd been preparing for a quiet morning, the kind where he could finally gather his thoughts, but instead, there he was. Travis, standing on the other side, his face twisted in a way that Charlie had come to recognize all too well. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was something else. A challenge, a subtle threat disguised as something benign. Charlie stood there for a moment, studying him through the peephole. He could feel his pulse quicken, a familiar knot in his stomach tightening. The last thing he needed was another confrontation with Travis, but it seemed the time had come, whether he was ready for it or not. He opened the door, keeping his expression neutral. "What do you want, Travis?" Travis stepped forward without waiting for an invitation, his movements brimming with an overconfidence Charlie didn't trust. "We need to talk," he said, his tone almost too smooth, like he was trying to control the situation before it even began. Charlie didn't step aside, but he didn't shut the door either. About what? Travis glanced around, his eyes briefly scanning the house before settling back on Charlie. About family consolidation, he said, using air quotes around the phrase like it was some well-rehearsed pitch. You know, Lily wants what's best for everyone. A house this big, it's a lot for you to handle. It's a lot for anyone, really. You're not getting any younger. The words were like a slap, all over again. There it was again. His age, his worth, the assumption that Charlie's house, his life, was just something to be rid of. Charlie's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. He had spent a lifetime mastering the art of remaining calm, even when everything inside him screamed to lash out. Lily never said anything like that, Charlie replied, his voice low, controlled. You don't speak for her, Travis. Travis's eyes flickered for a moment, irritation flashing behind them, but he recovered quickly. His tone was still smooth, though there was an underlying edge now. I don't need to speak for her. I'm just here to help, Charlie, to make sure we're all moving forward. We're family, right? We should be looking out for each other. Charlie wasn't fooled. This wasn't about helping. It was about pushing him out, about forcing him into something he didn't want. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling, Charlie said, his voice still calm, but there was a steel beneath it now. He could feel his patience slipping, but he wasn't going to give Travis the satisfaction of a reaction. Travis didn't take the rejection well. He took a step closer, his face hardening. You don't understand, old man, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. You think you have control of this, but you don't. I do. His voice was laced with a cold certainty, like the words were a warning more than a statement. Charlie's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't show it. Instead, his hand subtly moved to his pocket, where his phone rested, ready to record. He had learned long ago that the best way to handle Travis was to have proof that the man's charm and manipulations weren't all that they seemed. I have ways to force a decision, Charlie, Travis continued, his eyes narrowing, his words now deliberate, venomous. You're not in control here. You never were. Charlie felt the anger building inside him, a slow burn that threatened to break free, but he kept his expression neutral, his fingers steady as he recorded. This wasn't just a conversation. This was Travis's final warning, his attempt to push Charlie into a corner, to make him back down. You've got nothing on me, Travis, Charlie said, his voice unwavering. I won't be bullied. Travis sneered, but he knew Charlie wasn't going to cave. We'll see about that, he said, his voice still dripping with menace. But you'll regret it. We'll all regret it. With that, Travis turned and left without another word, slamming the door behind him. Charlie stood there, frozen for a moment, his mind racing as he replayed the conversation in his head. Ways to force a decision. The words were a threat, plain and simple. Travis was showing his true colors, and Charlie knew that the only way to handle him now was with force of his own, legally, carefully. After a few seconds, Charlie pulled his phone from his pocket and forwarded the recording to Kim. There was no time to waste. Travis was becoming more reckless with each passing day, and Charlie knew that if he didn't act fast, he might lose everything. As the message sent, Charlie felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure what was coming next. But he knew one thing for certain. Travis was going to keep pushing until he had no choice but to fight back. And this time, Charlie wasn't going to let him win. But even as Charlie prepared for the battle ahead, there was one thing gnawing at him. Lily. She was caught in the middle, and no matter what, he couldn't forget that. She didn't deserve this. But right now, he couldn't focus on that. Travis had made the first move, and now it was time for Charlie to make his. The question was, how far would Travis go next? The house was quiet except for the soft shuffle of little feet running around the living room. Charlie sat on the couch, his eyes focused on the old clock ticking steadily on the wall. It had been a long week, too long, and he was starting to feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. But when Harper and Jonah were around, everything else faded away. Their laughter was the only noise that mattered, a temporary escape from the storm brewing just outside the door. Lily had asked him to babysit while she ran errands, And though Charlie knew she was doing her best to hold everything together, he could see the cracks starting to show. She was worn down, stretched thin. The pressures of Travis, the house, everything. She was carrying it all alone. And Charlie hated it. He hated seeing her like this. But there was nothing he could do for her yet, not without making things worse. Harper was sitting on the floor, stacking blocks into a wobbly tower, her small hands moving quickly, intent on getting the pieces just right. Jonah was nearby, chasing the family cat around, laughing uncontrollably as the cat darted from one hiding spot to another. For a brief moment, the world outside seemed a little less heavy, the problems just a little further away. But then, Harper spoke, her voice innocent, too innocent for the weight of the words that came next. "Daddy said you'll move soon," she said, glancing up at Charlie as she placed another block on top of the tower. The words hit Charlie like a physical blow. For a second, his body stiffened, and he felt his heart slam against his chest. "Move?" "Daddy said that?" Charlie asked, his voice betraying none of the shock or anger bubbling inside him. He forced a smile, trying to mask the protective rage that surged through him. Harper nodded, her small face a picture of innocence. She had no idea what those words really meant. She didn't understand the storm that was gathering, or the depths of the betrayal her father had planted in the ground beneath them. Jonah stopped his chase for the cat, pausing long enough to add his 2 cents. "Yeah," he said, his little voice high and chipper. "Daddy said your house is his new office." He laughed, but it was a nervous sound, like he was unsure whether he should be laughing at all. Charlie's blood ran cold. He stared at them for a long moment, feeling the weight of those words sink deeper into his bones. It was one thing for Travis to manipulate Lily, to push her into a corner, but this was something else entirely. He was dragging the kids into it now. He was using them to reinforce the lie, to plant a seed of doubt in their minds. Charlie took a slow breath, trying to steady himself, trying to keep his voice calm. He couldn't let them see how much it hurt, how much it enraged him. Not yet. He wasn't going to give Travis that satisfaction. "Well, that's not true," Charlie said finally, his voice gentle as he pushed the knot in his throat down. "Your daddy doesn't get to decide that, okay?" He leaned forward slightly, looking at each of them in turn, making sure they felt the sincerity in his words. "This is our home, your grandpa's home, and we're not going anywhere." Harper looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, her brow furrowing slightly, as if trying to figure out whether she should be worried. Charlie reached over and brushed a lock of hair from her forehead, giving her a reassuring smile. Jonah, distracted again by the cat, didn't seem to notice the change in the air. But Harper's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she returned to her block tower, her small hands busy again. But then the silence hung there a little too long, thick with the unspoken truths that were never said aloud. The kids were so young, so innocent, and yet they could feel the tension, the shift in the air. They didn't understand the complexities of adult relationships, of manipulation and betrayal, but they understood something was wrong. They knew things were off, even if they couldn't name it. After a few moments, Harper looked up again, her voice quieter now. "Mommy cries at night sometimes," she said, her words soft, almost hesitant. "She says it's because of Daddy." Charlie's chest tightened, the words cutting deeper than anything Travis could have said. He felt something dark rise up in him at the mention of Lily's pain. How had it gotten this far? How had it all gone so wrong? "Hey now," Charlie said softly, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled both of them into his arms, holding them close, feeling the warmth of their little bodies against his chest. "It's okay. Mommy's just going through a tough time, but she's strong, and so are you two, and we're going to be all right." Harper pressed her face against his shoulder, her small hands clutching at his shirt. Jonah, always the more rambunctious one, wiggled free to grab his toy truck, but Charlie could see the concern in his eyes. The weight of it all was too much for a child to bear, and yet they were caught in the middle of it. Charlie held them for a few moments longer. The love he felt for them mixing with the sorrow and anger gnawing at his insides. He could protect them from the worst of it, but he couldn't protect Lily, not from herself. She was trapped, emotionally, stuck between the man she loved and the man she needed to fight. And the realization hit him hard. No matter what happened, he couldn't let Travis win. Not now, not ever. But how could he save Lily when she wasn't ready to fight for herself? The questions swirled in his mind as he held the kids close, the storm outside and the storm within, threatening to break free at any moment. Charlie stood outside the courthouse, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the steps. He had been here before, many years ago, first as a young sailor with a mind full of ambition, then as an older man, a veteran of both service and life. But today, standing at the threshold of this familiar building, he felt out of place, as if the world around him had shifted, leaving him behind. He wasn't here as a witness or a defendant. Today, he was here as someone who needed answers. Judge Randall Pierce had been a close friend for decades. They had served together in the Navy, and though their paths had diverged after that, they had remained in contact. The judge had retired a few years ago, but his mind was still sharp, his sense of justice as solid as ever. Charlie trusted him. He had no one else to turn to, and right now, he needed someone who could see things clearly, someone who wouldn't let him get lost in his own anger and frustration. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and Charlie stepped into the judge's chambers. The smell of old books and polished wood filled the air, a stark contrast to the tense energy that had been building inside Charlie since the moment Travis had crossed that line. He didn't know how to begin, didn't know where to start with the mess that had become his life. Pierce was sitting behind his desk, studying a stack of papers when Charlie walked in. He looked up and gave a slow, measured smile, the kind that spoke of years of wisdom and quiet understanding. "Charlie," he said, his voice warm. "Come on in, my friend. It's been too long." Charlie took a seat across from him, settling into the familiar creak of the old leather chair. He could feel the weight of his own words pressing down on him, the story he had to share sitting heavy on his chest. "I've got a situation," Charlie began, his voice steady but carrying the quiet tension of everything unsaid. "It's about my son-in-law, Travis." Pierce didn't react immediately. He simply nodded, his hands folding over the papers in front of him. "Go on." Charlie hesitated for a moment, trying to figure out how to frame it all, how to explain the mess that had unfolded without diving into the darker details. "There's been some issues with my house," he said finally. "Travis has been trying to force me out. He's been making threats, and now he's listed the house for sale online, without my permission." Pierce's brow furrowed slightly as he reached for the papers on his desk, flipping through them with the practiced hands of someone who had seen hundreds of cases in his career. The list of documents Charlie had brought, the screenshots, the listing, the emails, were spread out in front of him now. Pierce took his time, studying each page with a calm precision that only made Charlie's anxiety grow. "He's building a paper trail of entitlement," Pierce said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about a house. This is an effort to claim something he thinks he has a right to. He's already positioning himself as the rightful owner, whether it's legally valid or not." He paused, looking up at Charlie with a kind of quiet sympathy. "This isn't the first time I've seen someone use a fraud scheme like this to claim ownership. It's slick, Charlie, but it's still fraud." Charlie's heart thudded in his chest, the weight of Pierce's words settling heavily around him. He had known it, deep down. He had felt it. But hearing it confirmed made the whole thing more real. Travis wasn't just being a bully. He was trying to steal what was his. And Charlie had to stop him before it was too late. "What do I do?" Charlie asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, raw, with the desperation of someone who had reached the end of his rope. Pierce leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the desk thoughtfully. "You need to protect yourself legally, Charlie, quietly, without drawing too much attention. If you're not careful, Travis will find a way to turn the tables on you." Charlie leaned forward, a new resolve hardening inside him. "What's the best way to do that?" Pierce paused for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You need to transfer the property into a trust. That will give you the legal leverage to protect your home without making a big scene. It'll be harder for Travis to claim any ownership if the house is legally held in a trust." Charlie's mind raced. A trust. It was a clever solution, one that would buy him time and keep Travis at bay while he prepared his next steps. It was a strategic move, one that Pierce had seen work many times before. "I'll get on it," Charlie said, his voice steady now, the anger and fear of earlier, slowly being replaced by a quiet, determined focus. "I'll start the process today." Pierce nodded, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Good. And if it comes to it, if you need someone to back you up in court, I'll testify. I'll stand by you, Charlie. You don't have to do this alone." The words were like a lifeline, a thread of hope in the middle of everything. Charlie didn't know if he'd ever need that testimony, but knowing Pierce was there made him feel a little less alone in the battle ahead. "Thanks," Charlie said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I won't forget this." As he stood to leave, the weight of everything still pressed on his shoulders, but it felt more manageable now. There was a way forward. There was a strategy. But as Charlie stepped out of Pierce's chambers and into the cold air outside, he knew the fight wasn't over. Travis would push harder now. He would fight back, and it would only get uglier from here. But Charlie was ready. He was going to protect his home, his family, no matter what it took. The game was on, and he wasn't going to lose. The days after his meeting with Judge Pierce had been a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Charlie had never been a man who liked to rush into anything, but everything about this situation felt like it was spiraling out of control. Every time he thought he had a handle on things, something new would surface. Travis's latest threat, the fraudulent listing, the lies that seemed to pile up higher with each passing day. But now, in the quiet of his office, Charlie sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly, watching the email notification pop up on his computer screen. It was from Kim Dawson, his attorney. The subject line read simply, "Trust documents sent." Charlie clicked open the email, his fingers trembling slightly as he scanned the details. Kim had moved quickly. The irrevocable trust had been set up, and his property was now legally untouchable by Travis, or anyone else for that matter. The house was no longer Charlie's to lose. It was safeguarded, locked away behind legal walls Travis couldn't breach. For now, at least. Travis had no idea. The best part was that Travis hadn't seen it coming. He had been so focused on pushing Charlie out, manipulating everyone around him, that he hadn't even noticed the countermove. But now Charlie had the upper hand, and it felt like the first real victory in weeks. Still, there was no time to celebrate. Travis's game had only just begun, and Charlie knew this was just the beginning of a much larger war. His next move needed to be calculated, calm. But even as he felt a sense of temporary relief, the weight of what was to come loomed large. Just as Charlie closed his laptop, a knock at the door startled him. It was soft, tentative, but there was something in the way it was knocked that made his stomach tighten. He opened it slowly, his thoughts already racing to the possible reasons Lily might be at his door. She hadn't come by in days, not since everything had started escalating with Travis. Lily stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes red and swollen. The sight of her instantly made Charlie's heart twist. She had always been strong, always the one who held the family together. But now? Now she looked as if she were falling apart at the seams. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Charlie stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She didn't look like the daughter he knew. There was something vulnerable in her now, something he hadn't seen before. She seemed smaller somehow, defeated, her shoulders slumped as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her. "What's going on?" Charlie asked, his voice soft but steady. He could see she was holding something back, but he couldn't tell if it was pain or shame. Lily took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I don't know how it got this far. I didn't want to believe it. But Travis, he's been pressuring me, financially." She wiped her eyes quickly, her voice faltering. "He said we needed to sell the house, that we'd be better off. But I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't know he was using me. Using us." Charlie's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything, that Travis wasn't just manipulating her, that he was trying to steal the house, but now wasn't the time. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she continued, her voice breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see. I see what he's doing, and I don't know how to stop him." Charlie's heart ached for her. He had known all along that Travis had been using Lily, but hearing it from her, seeing the brokenness in her eyes, it made the truth even harder to swallow. His daughter had become another victim of Travis's manipulation, and the realization hit him harder than he expected. She hadn't been complicit. She had been trapped. Charlie reached out, pulling her into a gentle hug. It wasn't much, but it was something. He didn't know what else to say, didn't know how to make the hurt go away. "Lily, you don't have to apologize," Charlie whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been doing your best. You've been trying to keep everything together." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "But listen to me. You don't have to carry this alone. We'll figure this out. I'm not going to let him get away with it. Not this time." She looked up at him, her eyes full of relief and gratitude, but there was still so much uncertainty in them. She didn't fully understand the fight he was preparing for, the game that was about to unfold. "I'll protect you, both of you," Charlie continued, his voice firm with the kind of resolve that had carried him through harder times. But as he spoke those words, something darker lingered in his chest. He had made his first move, but the real battle had only just begun. And he knew, deep down, that this wasn't going to end without a fight. As Lily wiped away a tear, Charlie felt the weight of the war ahead pressing in on him. Travis wasn't going to back down, not without a fight. And Charlie? He wasn't going to let him win. It was just after noon when Charlie received the first call. The number was unfamiliar, and there was a slight hesitation in the voice on the other end. "Hi, this is Roger. I'm here to schedule a walkthrough of the property on Willow Street, Charlie Benton's house. Travis Miller told me you'd be expecting me." The words hit like a slap, and for a moment, Charlie's mind went blank. Travis. Of course, it was him. The man had no boundaries, no respect for the fact that Charlie had already made his intentions clear. He was escalating now, using deceit, using others to do his dirty work. "I'm not sure what you're talking about," Charlie replied, his voice steady but tight. "There's no meeting scheduled, no walkthrough. Who did you say you were with again?" The man on the other end hesitated, but then the name came again. Travis Miller. As if saying Travis's name was supposed to make everything legitimate, as if it somehow gave him the right to walk into Charlie's life and take what he wanted. "I'm sorry, but there's no authorization for any kind of showing. I'm not expecting anyone," Charlie said, keeping his voice neutral, calm. There was a pause, the man likely confused, probably unsure how to continue now that Charlie wasn't playing along. "Well," he said slowly, "I was told you'd be—" Before he could finish, Charlie hung up. He could already feel the tightness building in his chest, a mix of anger and something colder, something darker. This wasn't just a simple mistake or misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Travis was pushing harder now, using someone else to further his scheme. The game had changed, and Charlie knew that his patience was wearing thin. He took a moment to compose himself, trying to shake off the gut-wrenching sense of betrayal that twisted through him. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was from Lily. "Dad, someone just called. They want a showing at the house. Travis is really angry. He said you're embarrassing him." Embarrassing him. Charlie's fist clenched around the phone. The audacity, the manipulation. All of it, carefully timed to make him look like the villain. The more Charlie thought about it, the clearer it became. Travis wasn't just trying to get the house. He was trying to destroy everything Charlie had built, to paint him as the unreasonable one in this twisted drama. But Charlie wasn't going to play by his rules. Not anymore. There was a knock at the door before he could process the text. His heart skipped a beat as he slowly made his way to the front, already knowing who it was. When he opened the door, the man from the phone call was standing there, holding a small clipboard and smiling as if he'd done nothing wrong. "Hello," the man said, his voice casual, almost too casual. "I'm Roger. I'm here for the walkthrough." Charlie stared at him, cold fury rising. "There's no scheduled walkthrough. Travis has no right to show my house to anyone without permission." He studied the man's face, trying to gauge whether he was part of the deception or simply unaware of the situation. The man looked genuinely confused, but Charlie wasn't fooled. Travis had orchestrated this entire thing. The man was nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Charlie continued, his voice icy, "but I'm going to need your full name and contact number for my records." The man hesitated for just a moment, but then nodded and rattled off the information. Charlie quickly jotted it down, memorizing it before pulling out his phone. He didn't trust Travis, and he didn't trust this stranger either. The situation was escalating, and he had to stay ahead of it. As soon as the man left, Charlie dialed Kim. Her voice answered on the second ring. "Charlie?" "Kim, I've got a situation," Charlie said, keeping his voice low. "A man just showed up at my house, claiming to be here for a walkthrough. I got his name and number, but I need to know how to handle this. I think Travis is getting more brazen." Kim's response was calm, but there was an edge to her voice that spoke volumes. "Perfect. More evidence. You did the right thing by getting his details. It shows intent. If Travis is escalating, we need to document everything." She paused, then added, "Hold on to that info. We're going to use it." Charlie's fingers gripped the edge of the counter as he took in her words. Every move Travis made now was being tracked, cataloged, and it would all come back on him. The game was far from over, but Charlie had learned something crucial today. He was no longer just reacting. He was building his case, step by step. Charlie hung up, but his thoughts remained sharp and restless. As much as he hated the idea of dragging this out, he knew it was the only way. Travis had forced his hand, and now it was time to make him face the consequences. Lily's earlier message still lingered in his mind. "Travis is really angry. He said you're embarrassing him." Travis thought he was untouchable, but Charlie knew better now. The next move would be his, and this time, Travis wouldn't see it coming. But the question remained, just how far would Travis go to regain control? Charlie had barely finished his coffee when he heard the knock at the door. It was sharp, frantic, not the usual casual tap he'd gotten used to from neighbors or friends. This was different. His gut twisted, and he felt the tension in his chest before he even opened the door. When he did, there was Lily, her face flushed, eyes swollen with tears, as though she'd been crying for hours. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The panic in her expression spoke volumes. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her body trembling as she shut the door behind her. "Dad, he said you hit him." Lily's voice cracked on the words, as though speaking them was physically painful. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for some explanation, some reason to believe that what Travis had told her was a lie. "He said you hit him, and now he's talking about filing a restraining order against you. How could you do that?" Charlie felt as though the floor had dropped out beneath him. He stood frozen in the doorway, the world spinning for a moment, and then everything narrowed to Lily's face, pale, desperate, struggling to reconcile the man she loved with the accusation she'd just thrown at him. It took everything in him not to react. His anger surged, a storm threatening to break free, but Charlie knew that this wasn't the time for rage. Not now. Not when Lily, his daughter, was standing there, her trust unraveling in front of him. "I never laid a hand on him," Charlie finally said, his voice calm but tight with restraint. His jaw clenched as he felt a wave of betrayal hit him. How could Travis twist the truth so easily? How could he manipulate her like this? Lily shook her head, the disbelief written all over her face. "But he's so convincing, Dad. He's so sure of it. He said you've been lying to me, that you—" She stopped, biting her lip, clearly struggling to form the words. Charlie stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Lily, listen to me." He placed his hands on her shoulders, pulling her into his gaze, forcing her to meet his eyes. "He's lying to you. He's manipulating you." The words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, Charlie saw a flicker of doubt pass through her eyes. He could see that she didn't want to believe it, that she didn't want to believe her husband was capable of something like this. But Charlie wasn't going to sugarcoat it anymore. "I didn't hit him," Charlie continued, his voice softening, the weight of his next words settling in. "But he did hit me, Lily. He slapped me, right outside your house after dinner." I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to have to carry that burden. But he's lying about everything. About everything. I'm not the one who's been hurting anyone here. He is. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lily's breath hitched, her face drained of color as the words settled in. The shock on her face was almost unbearable, and Charlie could see the moment it all started to hit her. The realization that the man she had chosen, the man she had trusted, had been playing a game the entire time. She stumbled back a step, her legs shaking as though her body was physically absorbing the weight of the truth. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "No, no, it can't be true." Charlie watched as she swayed, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support, the tears falling freely now, a silent storm of grief and confusion washing over her. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she sobbed, collapsing into him. "I didn't know. I didn't see it. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought he was just frustrated. I thought he loved me." Charlie wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as she shook against him. His heart broke for her, for the way she had been so easily manipulated. He'd done this to her, and in that moment, he understood the depth of the trap she had been in. The emotional web Travis had woven so tightly around her, pulling her into his control, forcing her to believe the lies. "Lily, I'm so sorry you've had to go through this," Charlie whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You never should have been put in this position." She pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her face stricken. "What do we do now? What do I do now?" Charlie stayed quiet for a long moment, the weight of it all pressing down on him. What could he do? He wasn't just fighting for his own freedom now, he was fighting for her and for his grandkids. "I think it's time to protect you," Charlie said finally, his voice steady, though the anger still simmered beneath. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you and the kids are safe. I'm not going to let him keep controlling you, not anymore." Lily nodded, though her eyes were filled with uncertainty. She wasn't ready to make the leap yet, to see Travis for who he truly was. But Charlie knew that now wasn't the time for explanations. It was time for action. And as he held her close, the determination in his chest grew, fueled by the promise he made to her and the kids. Travis wasn't going to get away with this, not any longer. But even as Charlie felt the resolve harden inside him, a nagging thought lingered in the back of his mind. Would Lily be ready to make the fight her own? Or would she still choose to protect the man who had hurt her? The battle ahead would take more than just strategy. It would take trust, and Charlie wasn't sure if Lily was ready to face the truth just yet. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. The police station smelled faintly of coffee and musty paper, a cold, sterile environment that only added to the weight pressing down on Charlie's shoulders. He'd been there before, years ago in his younger days, but today was different. He wasn't walking in as a concerned citizen or a witness. He was walking in as a man about to make the first official step in a battle that was consuming everything around him. Charlie sat at the desk across from Officer Williams, a younger man with sharp eyes and a serious demeanor. He had barely spoken to Charlie beyond pleasantries, but now, as he read through the information Charlie had handed over, photos, notes, the recording of the threat, the officer's gaze shifted from neutral to something else, something more focused. "Mr. Benton," Officer Williams said, tapping the papers with his pen, "this is pretty serious." He glanced at the screen of his computer, then back up at Charlie. "This isn't just a case of a domestic dispute or someone losing their temper. The recording you've provided, the threats—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "This is coercive behavior, tied to property claims. He's trying to force you into giving up your home." Charlie remained silent, feeling the anger simmer beneath his calm exterior. He had known, of course, that this was bigger than just a slap. Travis wasn't just trying to control him, he was trying to control everything. His life, his property, his future. But hearing it from the officer, seeing it laid out in front of him in cold legal terms, made it all feel real. Too real. Officer Williams paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he prepared to officially file the report. "We'll open an investigation based on the information you've provided, Mr. Benton. We'll need to contact you for follow-up questions. I'll make sure everything gets documented properly." Charlie nodded, his gaze fixed on the officer, trying to hold his composure even as the weight of what had happened, the slap, the threats, the lies, pressed heavier and heavier on his chest. It felt like the beginning of something much darker, and part of him wasn't sure if he was ready for the storm that was about to break. But there was no going back now, not when it had all gone this far. As Officer Williams finished entering the details into the system, the door to the precinct opened, and Lily stepped in. She looked out of place, her eyes red, her steps hesitant. She wasn't the strong, confident woman Charlie had always known. Today, she was a daughter, ashamed and fragile, walking into a fight she never wanted. Charlie's heart sank as he saw her standing there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if she were afraid of what she might say or do next. The last time they had spoken, she was still trying to hold on to the idea that Travis was just confused, just under pressure. But today, there was something different in her eyes, something broken. She approached the desk slowly, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke to Charlie. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen it sooner." Charlie stood up, his anger melting into something else, a tenderness he hadn't realized he still had for her. "Lily," he said softly, his hands reaching out to her, "you don't have to apologize. None of this is your fault. You're not the one who lied, who manipulated all of us. Travis did that." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again, and Charlie stepped closer, pulling her into a hug. He felt the tremble of her body against his, and for a moment, he let himself hold her as he used to. Before all of this, before Travis had come into their lives and turned everything upside down. As Lily pulled back, she looked up at him, still filled with guilt, but now also a hint of something else. Resolve. "I'll help. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'm not going to let him keep doing this to us." Charlie's heart ached for her. He could see that she was trying to break free of the web Travis had spun around her. But he knew it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be just one conversation, one decision. She had been manipulated for so long, and it would take more than words to undo the damage. The officer, sensing the emotion in the room, quietly stood up. "Mr. Benton, Ms. Benton, we'll be in touch once the investigation progresses. I'll make sure you're kept informed every step of the way." As the officer left, the reality of the situation settled over Charlie like a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. He had filed the report, but there was no real relief in that. He had set the wheels in motion, but the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Charlie stood there looking at Lily, his mind already turning to the next steps, the next battle. "I'm not done with him, Lily," Charlie said quietly, the resolve hardening in his voice. "This isn't just about protecting the house anymore. It's about making sure he can't hurt you or the kids ever again." Lily nodded, the spark of determination flickering in her eyes. "I know, Dad. I'll help however I can." Charlie glanced at his phone where a message from Kim had just come through. "The timing is now perfect. We move on the trust next." He exhaled, his mind already racing toward the next move. Travis had no idea what was coming for him. The fight was far from over. It was only beginning. And Charlie wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. The house felt different now, almost as if it no longer belonged to Charlie. The air inside seemed heavier, as though the walls were filled with a quiet, palpable tension that wasn't there before. For the past few days, he'd been working with Kim, finalizing the paperwork to transfer the property into the irrevocable trust. It was an intricate process, one that required precision, but Charlie felt a surge of relief every time he saw a document signed, every step that brought him closer to securing the house, keeping it out of Travis's hands. He was sitting at the kitchen table when he received the final confirmation from Kim. The house was officially safe. The legal hurdles were done. His home, his sanctuary, was now protected, the ownership irrevocably tied to the trust. But that wasn't enough, not by a long shot. Charlie had already begun his next move. He'd contacted the police, and with their help, he was changing all the locks on the house. A police-approved notice had been posted on the door, making it clear that Travis was no longer welcome, that any attempt to access the property without permission would be considered trespassing. Charlie wasn't taking any chances now. The sound of the locksmith's drill echoed through the house, filling the quiet with the sharp buzz of security being put in place. Charlie had already replaced the locks on every door and window, a measure he knew would keep Travis out. But that wasn't enough either. He needed eyes on the house. He needed to be sure Travis couldn't sneak his way in through the back door, or worse, try to intimidate him again. That's where Marla came in. She stood at the gate now, her eyes scanning the street as she kept watch over the property. Charlie appreciated her quiet vigilance. Marla had been his friend for years, and in these moments of tension, he needed people he could trust. People who weren't swayed by Travis's manipulations. Charlie finished tightening the last lock and stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. He glanced up at the cameras that had been installed earlier, each one positioned carefully around the perimeter of the house. They were wired to send live feeds to his phone, so he'd always know what was happening around the property. He was about to step out to check the cameras one last time when he heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. His heart clenched. He already knew who it was before he even saw the familiar SUV pulling up. Travis. Charlie's stomach tightened, his body instinctively going rigid. He knew this moment was coming, but part of him had hoped it wouldn't. He quickly moved to the front door, just as Travis slammed the car door and stalked toward the house. "What the hell is this?" Travis's voice rang out, thick with fury. He was already halfway up the porch steps before Charlie could even respond. "Travis?" Charlie said, keeping his voice steady. He stepped out onto the porch, blocking Travis's path, his hand resting on the doorframe. "You're not welcome here. You've been served." Travis's eyes flared with rage as he tried to push past Charlie. "You think this is over? You think you can just lock me out of my own property?" He spat, his face turning red. "You've got another thing coming, old man." Charlie's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. He stood his ground, knowing full well that Travis wasn't the only one with an agenda anymore. Behind him, Charlie heard the faint hum of a police car approaching. He'd called them the moment he knew Travis would show up. He wasn't taking any chances now. Just as Travis reached for the door, determined to force his way inside, the police car rolled into the driveway. Officer Martinez stepped out of the car, his expression calm but firm. "Mr. Miller, you need to step away from the property." Travis froze, his eyes darting from Charlie to the officer, realizing too late that he was caught. "What is this? I have every right to be here," he shouted, his voice shaking with frustration. Officer Martinez held up a hand, his tone authoritative. "You've been served notice. You're trespassing. Step away from the door, or we'll have to arrest you." For a moment, it felt like the world stood still. Travis glared at Charlie, his face twisted in a mask of anger and disbelief. But when he saw the unyielding look in Officer Martinez's eyes, he finally backed off, muttering curses under his breath as he stomped back to his car. Charlie watched him leave, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily on his shoulders. He had won this round, but he knew it wasn't over. Travis would find another way to make his move, but for now, at least, Charlie had bought himself time. From the corner of his eye, Charlie noticed Lily standing by the gate, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the scene unfold. He hadn't expected her to be here, not like this. She had probably been watching from a distance, too afraid to confront the truth head-on. She approached slowly, her footsteps hesitant, and when she reached him, she collapsed into his arms, her tears falling freely now. I don't know how it got this far, Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with guilt and fear. "I didn't know he could do all this. I didn't know it was this bad." Charlie held her tightly, his own heart heavy with the weight of the situation. "It's not your fault, Lily," he murmured, pressing his cheek against her hair. "You're not the one who put us in this mess. We'll get through this. Together." But even as he said the words, a part of him knew the battle was far from over. Travis wasn't finished, not yet, and neither was he. Charlie looked up, his gaze hardening as he watched Travis's car disappear down the street. This was just one battle. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first email arrived late in the afternoon, its subject line terse and biting. "You've ruined everything." Charlie didn't even have to open it to know it was from Travis. He could feel the tension in the pit of his stomach as he clicked it open, his eyes scanning the words that followed. The anger in the text was palpable, raw, and unrestrained. "You've ruined the family. You've taken everything from me. This is your fault. You stole my future." Charlie stared at the screen, the words burning into him. Ruined the family, stole his future. Travis, in his twisted version of reality, saw himself as the victim. He was a man who couldn't take responsibility for his own actions. Everything that had gone wrong in his life was someone else's fault, and now Charlie was the scapegoat. But this wasn't just a bitter rant. There was something deeper, something more dangerous in the way Travis was speaking now. The threats were veiled, but they were there, tucked between his words. Charlie could almost hear Travis's voice in his head, filled with venom and rage, as if everything had been taken from him. Charlie took a deep breath and closed the email. He wasn't going to give Travis the satisfaction of a reaction. He'd been prepared for this. He knew Travis wouldn't go down quietly. But now, every word, every email, every threat was another piece of evidence, another thread in the tapestry of manipulation Travis had spun. Kim Dawson had warned him this would happen. Travis wasn't just going to give up. He would lash out, try to tear apart everything Charlie had worked for, and use any means necessary to regain control. That's why Kim was already working on gathering everything, every threat, every piece of correspondence for the restraining order and fraud case they were building. But Charlie knew the real battle wasn't just legal, it was personal, and it was far from over. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and growing tension. Charlie's house felt more like a fortress than a home now, but it wasn't enough. Travis wasn't just after the property. He wanted to destroy Charlie's family, his life. He wanted everything, and no amount of locks or cameras would stop him from trying to tear it all down. Lily moved in with Charlie, bringing the kids along, her face a mixture of relief and shame. She had seen Travis's true nature now, and there was no going back. She wasn't ready to face the full extent of what had happened, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with the threat hanging over them. Not with Travis using his twisted form of control to break them down from the inside out. The kids were confused. They didn't fully understand what was going on, but they could feel the tension in the air. Harper, the older of the two, clung to Charlie's side, her innocent questions a painful reminder of how much they had already lost. Jonah, the younger one, simply followed his sister's lead, his face set in an expression of uncertainty as he tried to make sense of the shifting world around him. Charlie knew that moving in with him was the right decision, but it didn't feel like a victory. His house was safe, but the emotional toll of having his family upended was much harder to bear. Lily was still caught between wanting to protect her children and confronting the painful truth of the man she had married. Every day she seemed to struggle more, and Charlie could see it. She was still trapped in the web Travis had spun around her. As if the personal strain wasn't enough, things began to escalate in ways that couldn't be ignored. Travis, furious and desperate, turned to social media, launching a full-blown campaign of venomous posts aimed at Charlie. The words were calculated, a mix of half-truths and outright lies. He painted Charlie as the villain, as the one who had forced his family apart, the one who had stolen everything that was supposed to be his. He wasn't just angry. He was trying to destroy Charlie's reputation, to make him the villain in a story he had no control over. At first, Charlie tried to ignore it. But then he noticed something. The community was starting to notice. People in the neighborhood who had once waved hello now looked away. The once friendly smiles at the grocery store were replaced with uncomfortable glances. It wasn't just social media. It was spilling into real life, into the fabric of their community. People who had always respected him were beginning to question him, to take Travis's side, without hearing the full story. Charlie sat down in his office late one night, staring at the screen. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the damage was already done. But he couldn't stop. Not now. His fingers hovered over his keyboard, drafting his next move. Travis might have turned the world against him, but Charlie wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let his name be dragged through the mud. He wasn't going to let Travis destroy his family any more than he already had. In the silence of his office, Charlie exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing with determination. He had already done the hard part. Now it was time to make his final legal strike. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would be necessary. He had waited long enough. He looked at the screen one last time before hitting send, the weight of the next steps pressing down on him. There was no turning back now. But as he clicked the button, the question lingered in his mind. Would it be enough? Would the law, the evidence, and the truth finally stop Travis? Or would it only fuel his rage further? Charlie didn't know, but he wasn't about to let fear control him anymore. The envelope arrived late in the afternoon, the kind that always made Charlie's stomach twist. It was heavy, filled with papers that would either be the key to finally ending this or the start of an even darker chapter. He stared at the envelope for a long moment, his heart thumping in his chest. This was it, the moment that would define everything he'd been fighting for. Charlie opened it slowly, the sound of paper crinkling in the quiet of his home. He glanced at the first sheet, the restraining order. It was final, officially barring Travis from approaching him or his property. There was a sense of relief that washed over him, but it was fleeting. He knew this was just one piece of the puzzle, one small step in the battle that was still raging. He moved through the rest of the papers, the documentation of Travis's fraudulent property listing, the impersonation of Charlie's name as the owner of his own home, and finally, the assault report, the slap that had started it all. It was all here, in black and white, official. Charlie's mind wandered for a moment, back to that night, to the sting of Travis's slap and the weight of the threats that had followed. He had been too stunned to react then, but now, with everything laid out in front of him, it was clear that Travis had made a critical mistake. He had overplayed his hand, and now he would pay for it. He picked up the phone and dialed Kim. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice sharp and focused. "Charlie." "It's done," Charlie said, the words steady but laced with a deep, simmering anger. "The papers are filed. Restraining order, fraud, assault." Kim's response was calm, but there was satisfaction in her voice. "Good. We've built a solid case. Now we just wait for Travis to react." Charlie didn't like the idea of waiting. He wanted action, wanted the satisfaction of seeing Travis held accountable for everything he'd done. But he knew Kim was right. Patience was just another weapon in this fight. As Charlie hung up the phone, a chill ran through him. He wasn't just waiting for the case to unfold. He was waiting for Travis to lash out, to retaliate in ways he couldn't yet predict. And with that thought came the sinking realization that the war wasn't over. It had just begun. A few hours later, Charlie received the news he had been waiting for. Travis had been served. The papers had reached him at work. The immediate relief Charlie felt was mixed with something darker. Travis wouldn't take this sitting down. He was too prideful, too angry. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. Travis's meltdown was as dramatic as it was destructive. The first signs of it came through social media, a series of frantic posts and messages that painted him as the victim, as the one who had been wronged. He lashed out at Charlie, at Lily, at anyone who had the gall to stand against him. But the real show began when the office received word. It started with an angry phone call, then an argument in the break room. Travis's boss, after trying to calm him down, had no choice but to suspend him pending an investigation. The news quickly spread through the office, and the impact was swift. Travis had always been the loudest in the room, but now he was the one everyone was talking about. His colleagues, who had once respected him, now looked at him with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Charlie watched the storm unfold from a distance, unable to stop it, but knowing he didn't need to. Travis was spiraling, and it was only a matter of time before his lies were exposed. He had burned too many bridges, and now the consequences were catching up with him. Then, as if on cue, Lily's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, her eyes widening in shock as she scrolled through a series of screenshots from Travis's meltdown at work. The images, posted by his own coworkers, showed Travis shouting at his boss, pleading for his job, cursing Charlie's name. It was a full display of his unraveling. Lily didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the screen, her face pale, her eyes glazed over. Charlie stood behind her, watching as the reality of what had been happening to Travis and what he had put her through finally settled in. "Dad," Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know it was this bad." Charlie placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a silent comfort. He didn't need to say anything. She could see it now. Travis was unraveling, and Lily was finally seeing the man he truly was. The tears started then, the ones Lily had been holding back for so long. They came fast and hard, a rush of grief and confusion. She had fought so hard to believe in him, to see the good in her husband, but now the truth was undeniable. She was done making excuses for him. I can't be with him anymore, Dad, Lily said, her voice breaking. I have to protect the kids. I have to protect myself. I can't keep going like this. Charlie nodded, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and relief. He'd known this was coming. She had to make this decision for herself, for her kids, but that didn't make it any easier. We'll get through this, Charlie said softly, his voice steady, calm in a way that only came from years of facing hard truths. I'm here. I'll support you no matter what you need. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with raw emotion, but also with determination. I'll file for separation, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to do this. For me. For them. Charlie didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her in a tight embrace. You're not alone, Lily. We'll get through this together. But even as he held her, a thought lingered in the back of his mind. What would Travis do next? The storm was far from over. The courtroom was cold, sterile, a place where personal drama became business, where lives were reduced to facts and figures. Charlie sat in the front row, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He had been here before, as a witness, as a citizen in a system that felt distant and impersonal. But today, it was different. Today, he was the one who had been wronged, and everything he had fought for was on the line. The room was filled with the low murmur of people taking their seats, lawyers shuffling papers, and the distant echo of heels on the polished wood floor. It felt unreal, like this wasn't his life, like this was someone else's story. But as the judge's gavel rang out, silence fell, and the gravity of the moment hit him square in the chest. The judge, an older man with a stern face and graying hair, looked down at the papers in front of him. Charlie's attorney, Kim Dawson, sat next to him, her expression composed, yet there was an intensity in her eyes that told Charlie she was ready. She had prepared for this. She had done everything in her power to make sure they had the evidence to back up every claim, every accusation. The courtroom door opened with a soft creak, and Travis stepped in, his posture straight, his face wearing that familiar look of arrogance, as if he were still in control. He flashed a smile at the room, as though this was just another business deal to him, the same smile he had used to manipulate Lily, to charm his way into the lives of others. He was trying to look confident, but Charlie could see through it. Travis was rattled. He could sense the tremor beneath his cool exterior, the uncertainty that was creeping in, no matter how hard he tried to mask it. As Travis approached the defendant's table, Charlie noticed something else. Lily wasn't with him. It had been a point of contention in their personal life for months. But now, here in the courtroom, Charlie couldn't help but feel a twist in his chest. She had been through so much already, and Charlie knew that this hearing, this fight for justice, would be a turning point for both of them. It was clear now that she had made her decision. She wasn't going to stand by Travis anymore. Travis took his seat, still smiling, trying to charm everyone in the room as if they were all a part of the same play. But when the doors opened again, and Judge Randall Pierce walked in, his presence in the room shifted everything. The room fell into silence, the weight of his years on the bench obvious in the way the room straightened, the way everyone knew to give him respect. Charlie's heart skipped a beat. The judge wasn't just here as an observer. Judge Pierce was walking in as a character witness for Charlie, the man who had served with Charlie in the Navy, the man who had been there when Charlie had lost his wife, the man who knew the kind of person Charlie was. It was a gesture of support that meant more than words could express. Travis's charade was about to face the cold truth. The hearing began, and the prosecution wasted no time. Kim started by laying out the evidence, the fraudulent property listing Travis had posted online, the fake photos of Charlie's house, the claims that the house was for sale, the email threads filled with threats and manipulation. She presented everything with precision, a calm but fierce demeanor that showed Travis had no chance of weaseling out of this. Charlie felt the weight of every piece of evidence presented against Travis, the years of betrayal and deceit unfolding before him in the cold, impersonal way that only a courtroom could make it seem. The photographs of the slap, the timeline of the threats. Everything was laid bare. He watched as the judge carefully studied each exhibit, noting the inconsistencies, the lies Travis had told to everyone who would listen. Then came the recording. Kim played the audio of Travis's threats, his voice cold and filled with the kind of anger that made Charlie's blood boil all over again. He could hear the rage in Travis's voice, the calculated cruelty with which he'd tried to force Charlie into submission. When the cross-examination came, Charlie could see Travis's composure start to crack. Kim's questions were sharp, cutting through the facade of confidence Travis had so carefully built. She didn't let him off the hook. Each lie was dissected, each evasive answer met with more damning evidence. The tension in the room thickened with every question, and Charlie could feel Travis's panic mounting. He tried to hide it, but his face reddened, his hands clenched, and his voice wavered when he was asked to explain the inconsistencies in his testimony. His arrogance had been his downfall. He had underestimated the weight of the evidence against him. Charlie felt a surge of something, satisfaction maybe, but mostly just relief. This was it. This was the moment when it all came crashing down for Travis. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice steady and commanding. Based on the evidence presented and the behavior of Mr. Miller, I am granting Mr. Benton a full restraining order. Mr. Miller is hereby barred from approaching Mr. Benton, his property, or any member of his family. The fraudulent listing and threats will be reported to the appropriate authorities, and a criminal investigation will follow. Charlie exhaled deeply, his chest tightening with a mix of relief and disbelief. It was done. The house was secure. He had his protection, and Travis's grip on his life was officially broken. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no way for Travis to deny it anymore. But Travis wasn't done. He stormed out of the courtroom, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. His tantrum echoed through the hallway as he shoved past people in his way. It was a public meltdown, the kind Charlie had known was coming, but still couldn't ignore. As Charlie stood there, watching the storm of emotions in Travis's wake, Lily's eyes met his from across the room. She had seen it all, the meltdown, the public spectacle, the unraveling of the man she had once called her husband. Her voice trembled as she walked toward him, her steps slow but steady. I didn't know he was this broken. Charlie reached out and pulled her into a hug, his voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. It's not your fault, Lily. He's always been broken. But we're going to be okay now. As the door to the courtroom closed behind them, the reality of what was ahead settled in. Travis was finished, but the road to healing, for all of them, was just beginning. The separation papers were in front of her, but Lily hesitated. Her hand hovered over the form, the weight of it sinking deep into her chest. This was it, the final decision. She had never imagined she would find herself in this position, but after everything that had happened, after the lies, the manipulation, the threats, there was no other choice. She picked up the pen, her fingers trembling just slightly as she signed her name. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the severing of a tie, the closing of a chapter in her life she had once thought was unbreakable. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with everything, had broken her, and now she had to protect herself. She had to protect her children. Charlie had been there for her every step of the way, his steady presence a pillar she leaned on. He had always been her rock, the one person who never wavered. When she had wavered, when her emotions had clouded her judgment, Charlie had been the one to remind her of who she was, of what she deserved. He was the one who had finally convinced her that leaving Travis was the only way to regain control of her life. Lily glanced at the papers one last time before she slipped them into an envelope. The ink was dry. The decision was made. A few hours later, the doorbell rang, and Lily froze. She already knew who it was, the man she had hoped would stay away. Travis. She didn't even have to open the door to know he was standing on the other side. She could feel the tension building in her chest, the air thick with the past they had shared. When she opened it, there he was, his face flushed with anger, his eyes wide with desperation. "Lily," he started, his voice a mix of pleading and fury. "Please, you can't do this. We're family. We belong together. You can't throw everything away like this." Lily's heart broke at the sight of him. the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, reduced to this desperate shell of himself. But she couldn't let the old emotions sway her, not anymore. She had seen who he truly was, and that man didn't deserve her. "Travis," she said softly, her voice trembling but firm, "I'm done. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending you're someone you're not. You've lied to me. You've manipulated me. And I can't allow it to continue." His face twisted with rage, and his voice hardened. "You think this is over? You think you can just walk away from me like this? I'll make sure you regret this, Lily. You're nothing without me. Don't forget that." Lily recoiled, the venom in his words stinging more than she cared to admit. For a moment, she thought she might break down, fall back into his arms, let him convince her once more that he was the man she had once believed in. But she didn't. She stood firm, her gaze unyielding. "I'm not scared of you anymore," Lily said, her voice gaining strength. "You don't control me anymore." Travis stood there, breathing heavily, his face a mask of frustration and fury. But Lily was resolute. She had seen him for who he was, manipulative, controlling, and willing to destroy everything in his path to get what he wanted. She wouldn't let him do that to her anymore. "I'm going to take the kids and stay with Charlie for a while," Lily said, her voice steady. But the weight of the decision felt heavier than she expected. "I'm filing for emergency custody protections with Kim. I can't let him do this to us anymore. He's not safe." Charlie had been working closely with Kim Dawson, preparing for this day, helping Lily navigate the legal side of things. And Kim had been relentless, advising her on every step, guiding her through the process of applying for emergency custody. It wasn't just about separating from Travis. It was about protecting her kids, protecting herself from the man who had turned their lives upside down. The kids stayed with Charlie temporarily, their innocence a painful reminder of how much had been taken from them. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but Charlie could see it in their eyes, Harper clinging to him like a lifeline, Jonah still uncertain of why everything felt different. But Charlie was there, and that was all that mattered. Lily, too, was beginning to see what she had once ignored. She had spent so long trying to make sense of Travis's behavior, justifying his outbursts, blaming herself for his anger. But now, as the separation became final, as the truth about who he was came crashing down, she saw him for what he truly was, a man so consumed by his own insecurities and entitlement that he would destroy everything in his path to keep control. Travis spiraled. The phone calls and emails grew more frantic, the threats more erratic. He was losing everything: his job, his status, his grasp on the life he had once believed was his. His colleagues at work began to whisper. His boss pulled him aside for a warning, and it wasn't long before word spread that Travis was on the edge of being fired. His fall from grace was swift, and the anger he had directed at Lily now turned inward. He couldn't face the reality of his own downfall. Lily watched it all unfold from a distance, her phone buzzing with notifications of Travis's increasingly unstable behavior. It was almost like watching someone she didn't know anymore. This was the man who had promised her everything, the man who had manipulated her into believing she was the problem. She stood in her new life, with the kids safe, surrounded by the support of Charlie and Kim, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. But there was still that lingering question in the back of her mind. What would Travis do next? Would he keep coming for them, trying to tear their new life apart? Or would he finally realize that his control over her was over? As Lily sat with Charlie, her hand resting in his, she knew they had won this battle, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't over yet. It was just after lunch when Charlie first noticed the car. At first, he thought it was just a neighbor passing through the cul-de-sac, but then he saw it again, the familiar black SUV, slowing as it neared his house. His heart sank. The vehicle stopped at the end of the street, just out of view from his front door. Charlie didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. Travis. The rage, the uncertainty, the months of tension, all seemed to converge in that moment. Charlie's pulse quickened, his grip tightening on the kitchen counter as he stared out the window. He had hoped that this would end with the legal protection, with Travis realizing that his manipulation and threats had no place in their lives anymore. But Travis, desperate and cornered, hadn't taken the hint. Charlie's eyes flicked to the camera screen mounted in the corner of the room. The small, discreet devices he'd installed around the house were quietly capturing everything. It had been a precaution, but now, as he watched the SUV slowly creep toward his driveway, it felt like a lifeline. He grabbed his phone, dialed 911, and reported the violation of the restraining order before Travis even had the chance to get out of the car. The dispatcher's voice was calm but serious as she assured him the police would be there shortly. Charlie felt the weight of the moment sink in as he took a deep breath, his mind racing through the events that had led them here. This was it, the final stand. Within minutes, he saw the flashing lights through the blinds. The sirens screamed as the police arrived, their cars pulling up one after the other. Charlie's eyes stayed fixed on the screen, watching as Travis stepped out of the SUV, his face twisted in anger. But this time, there was no confrontation. There was no shouting or posturing. He was on their turf now, with the law firmly on Charlie's side. The officers moved in quickly, their voices low but firm, as they told Travis to stay put. For a moment, there was only silence. Travis frozen in place, the realization of his situation settling over him. Charlie could see it in his eyes. It was the same look he had seen on him 1,000 times before, the desperation of a man who knew he had lost control. Charlie's fingers tightened around the edge of the table as he watched the police approach, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. But to his surprise, Travis didn't fight back. There was no violent outburst, no last-ditch effort to assert his dominance. He complied, albeit reluctantly, as the officers cuffed him with practiced ease. The entire scene unfolded like a muted theater performance, too real, too painful, but almost detached at the same time. The neighbors, who had been watching from their windows or standing in their driveways, were silent. There was a quiet sort of relief in the air, though it wasn't loud or overt. It was the kind of relief that came from knowing that someone else had taken charge, that the man who had been terrorizing the neighborhood, the family, was finally being held accountable. Charlie stood by the window, his heart pounding in his chest, but his posture was steady, unyielding. There was no celebration in his demeanor, no sense of triumph. He wasn't happy to see Travis in handcuffs. He wasn't happy that the situation had come to this point. But there was a quiet sense of finality that settled over him. This had to happen. Travis had pushed them too far. Lily emerged from the house, her face pale, but her steps sure. She had been watching from the door, her hands clasped in front of her, her body trembling slightly. But as she stepped outside, something shifted in her. The fear, the anxiety, the years of trying to hold on to something that was broken. It all seemed to fade as she watched Travis being taken away. The tears came then. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't even seem to care who saw. But as her sobs echoed through the street, Charlie could see the mix of emotions in her eyes, grief for the life she had lost, for the man she had hoped could change, but also something else. A weight being lifted off her shoulders, a sense of freedom creeping in. "I'm sorry, Dad," Lily whispered between the tears, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know it would get this far." Charlie walked over to her, pulling her into a hug. He didn't say anything at first. What could he say? There was nothing to fix, no quick words to erase the pain. He just held her, letting her cry, letting her feel everything that had been building up for so long. "It's not your fault," he said softly, his voice thick but steady. "You didn't do this." "He did." Lily nodded against his chest, her breathing shaky, but Charlie could feel the relief in her body. She had been carrying this weight for so long, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe again. As the officers loaded Travis into the squad car, Charlie's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Kim. "We've got him," she said simply, her voice clipped but satisfied. "The case is essentially won. He's going down for everything, fraud, assault, everything." Charlie stared out the window as the police car drove away, a deep breath escaping his lips. It wasn't over. Not yet. But the first chapter of this nightmare had closed, and for the first time, Charlie felt the weight of the future settle on his shoulders. A future without Travis, a future where they could finally heal. But as the car disappeared down the street, one question still lingered in the back of his mind. What would Travis do when he finally hit rock bottom? Would he come back fighting, or would he finally give up? The uncertainty still hung in the air, and Charlie knew the battle wasn't quite over. But they had won this round, and that was all that mattered for now. The morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and steady, like the beginning of a new chapter. The house that had once felt so heavy with tension now seemed different. It felt still, peaceful. The kind of peace Charlie hadn't realized he'd been missing for so long. The quiet hum of everyday life filled the air, the sound of the kids playing, the gentle rustle of the trees outside, and the occasional creak of the house settling into its familiar rhythm. Lily and the kids had moved in with him a few weeks ago, and though the transition had been difficult, they were slowly finding their way. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't without its struggles, but it was peaceful, and for Charlie, that was enough for now. Harper and Jonah had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. They had their own space now, a little corner of the house they made their own, with toys scattered on the floor, the soft sound of cartoons playing on the TV. Harper, the older one, had started to ask Charlie about the old family photos that lined the walls, her curiosity about their family history drawing her closer to him. And Charlie loved that. He loved telling her about the times when Lily was young, when his own life had been full of chaos and joy in equal measure. But it was Harper's words that broke through Charlie's thoughts as he sat down to his coffee, staring at the children playing quietly in the living room. "Grandpa," she said, looking up at him with those big, innocent eyes, "the house feels safe again." Charlie's heart tightened at her words, but a smile tugged at his lips. "I'm glad it feels that way, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice thick with the emotions he'd been holding back for weeks. Safe. That was all he wanted for them, all he had ever wanted. As he stood up, moving toward the window to fix a loose shutter, the stillness of the house seemed to envelop him. The sound of his tools, the soft click of the shutter being tightened into place, brought a strange kind of comfort. There was something almost meditative in the simple act, something that made him feel grounded in a way he hadn't in months. The outside world was still out there, still filled with uncertainties, with the threat of Travis lingering like a shadow. But inside the walls of this house, inside this space he had worked so hard to protect, there was a calm he hadn't known in years. Lily was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, her movements slow but purposeful. Charlie watched her for a moment, noticing how different she seemed now. The last few months had been hard on her, but she was slowly rebuilding. She had started seeing a therapist, something she had resisted for so long, but now Charlie could see the change. Her eyes weren't filled with the same fear and guilt they had been. There was a lightness to her, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. She caught his gaze for a brief moment, offering him a soft smile as she stirred the eggs in the pan. "The kids are settling in well," she said, her voice warm, but tinged with a weariness that spoke of the battles she'd fought to get here. "It feels good to have a routine again." Charlie nodded, his mind drifting back to all that had happened. The endless arguments, the fear that had clouded every day, the manipulation Travis had used to tear apart their family. It seemed like another life, but it wasn't that long ago. Lily had been caught in a web, trapped between the man she had once loved and the reality that he wasn't who she thought he was. As he sat back down at the table, watching his daughter move with ease through the kitchen, Charlie realized something else. He had almost lost everything, not to Travis, but to fear and silence. The fear of confronting the truth, the silence he had kept about his own doubts and frustrations, had nearly cost him his family. But here they were, together, rebuilding. They weren't whole yet, but they were getting there. He took a deep breath, letting the quiet of the house settle in around him, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts as Lily sat down at the table, a cup of coffee in hand. She met his gaze, her expression open, like she was ready to talk, ready to move forward. "I'm glad you're here, Dad," she said softly. "I know it's been hard for all of us, but I think I'm finally starting to see things clearly. To see me clearly." Charlie reached out and squeezed her hand, the weight of everything they had been through settling between them. "You're stronger than you think, Lily, and we'll get through this. All of us." As the morning sun continued to filter through the windows, Charlie realized how far they had come. The road ahead would be long, but they had already made it through the worst of it. They had their lives back, and with each day, they were building something new, something stronger, something more honest. But even as he sat there, surrounded by the quiet, by the hope that was beginning to take root, a nagging thought lingered in the back of Charlie's mind. There were still so many things left unsaid, so much still to confront. Charlie knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he had hope, and that, at least, was a start. He stood up from the table, walking to the desk where his old notebook sat, the one he had written in for years but hadn't touched in months. Slowly, he opened it, the pages blank and waiting. He picked up his pen, and without thinking, he started writing. "A letter to my future self, to remind me of what matters." As he wrote, the quiet of the house around him seemed to grow louder, filling him with a peace he hadn't known he needed. But as he finished the sentence, the uncertainty that had been nagging at him all morning returned, lingering in the back of his mind. The real question was, what would the future hold? And was he truly ready for what came next? The pen hovered over the page as the uncertainty loomed, unanswered. The weight of it all had been lifted, but not without cost. As the final papers were signed and the court's ruling was handed down, the sense of finality hit Charlie with a cold certainty. Travis had accepted his defeat. The court had finalized the restrictions, the fraud penalties, and the long list of offenses he'd been trying so desperately to deny. His attempts to take control of Charlie's life, to manipulate and bully his way into everything, had finally been crushed. It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was justice, and it was enough for now. Lily stood beside Charlie as they listened to the judge's final words, the weight of the moment settling over them both. She had won full custody of the kids. It had been a long, painful journey, but the court had ruled in her favor. Travis was no longer a threat to their family. He wouldn't be able to manipulate, control, or hurt them again. Her eyes met Charlie's, and he saw something in them that had been missing for so long. Relief. She had done it. She had freed herself from the grip of the man who had held her captive for so many years, and now she had her independence back. It was something that had once seemed impossible. But here they were, standing in the aftermath, stronger than they had ever been before. The world outside the courthouse was quieter, as if the city itself had exhaled with them. But Charlie knew the journey wasn't over. He had his home, his family, his peace. And with everything now legally protected, he could finally breathe again. Later that day, Charlie sat down at his desk, pulling out the old, familiar papers. It wasn't something he'd expected to do just yet, but it felt like the right time. He took a pen in hand and updated his will, transferring the home into the trust for the final time, ensuring that nothing and no one could take it from his family. This home, the place where memories had been made and lives had been changed, would remain a safe haven for them forever. He signed the document with a sense of finality, the weight of the decision sinking in as he carefully sealed the envelope. It was done. Everything that had been threatened, everything Travis had tried to steal, was safe. Charlie had protected them. The house, the memories, the future. It was all secure now. As the evening settled in, Lily and the kids made their way to the kitchen where dinner was being prepared. The small holiday dinner was a quiet affair, but to Charlie, it felt like more than that. It was a celebration of what they had all endured, what they had survived. No grand speeches, no loud declarations, just the simple joy of being together, of having the freedom to move forward without fear. Lily set the table, her movements slow but purposeful. She wasn't the same woman who had walked through the door of Charlie's house months ago, broken and uncertain. No. She was stronger now, more certain of who she was and what she was capable of. And as the kids ran around the house, laughing and playing, Charlie couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. For her, for them, for this moment. After dinner, Charlie sat on the porch, his gaze drifting over the yard where the kids were playing. Harper and Jonah were running around, chasing each other, their laughter filling the air, unburdened by the world they had come from. It was a picture of innocence and joy, something Charlie had feared they might lose in the chaos. But here they were, thriving. Lily came to join him, sitting down beside him in the quiet of the evening. They watched the kids for a moment, and then Lily turned to him, her voice soft, but filled with emotion. "You saved us," she said, her eyes searching his face, trying to find the right words to express the depth of what she felt. "You saved me." Charlie smiled quietly, the weight of her words settling into his chest. He had done everything he could to protect her, to protect the kids. But he knew, deep down, that it wasn't just him who had made this possible. It was all of them, working together, finding strength in each other when it had seemed impossible. "No, Lily," Charlie said, his voice steady but filled with something deeper. "We saved each other." The air between them was filled with a new understanding, a new connection. The past was behind them, and the future was waiting. They had all faced the darkness, and now they were moving toward the light. The sound of the kids laughing in the background, the warmth of the evening air, and the quiet peace that filled the space around them made Charlie realize something. They had made it. Despite everything they had been through, despite all the pain and the fear, they had made it. And as he looked at Lily, her face soft, with the kind of relief that only came after a long battle, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The past was done, but the future, that was theirs to build. The weight of the evening settled over him as he sat back, watching his grandkids play. He had won the fight, but the real journey was just beginning. The question lingered, though, in the back of his mind. How long would Travis stay down? Would he try again, or was this the end of his reach? For now, Charlie let the uncertainty pass. He had his family, his home, and a future to rebuild. Whatever came next, they were ready for it. And that thought, that quiet certainty, was enough to carry him through.